like it. You want a podcast like it? Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. Just podcast like it. Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it's 1999.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Like It's 1989, the podcast where we talk about the films of 1989 from the 27th floor, Biff Tannen's Pleasure Paradise Casino and Hotel here in 2021. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny Nybar.
And I'm Shalisko. You read it a steam there. I liked it. You read it a breath.
I ran out of breath. It's been a long life.
I've always wondered why you were a writer and not an actor, and now I know.
Lung capacity.
I appreciate that you always wondered that until this point. I appreciate it took this long into our friendship for you to think, well, it clearly wasn't his looks because he's obviously handsome enough to be a leading man.
Extremely handsome, yes.
Back for her 100th time on the podcast, but the first time on the Patreon.
Yes.
Emily, thank you so much for coming, of course.
I get a cut for this, right?
Yeah.
You mean money?
Send me like $5,000. Yeah.
Eddie's face. You mean money?
No. Of course not. But you did get what no other person got on this podcast. Mm-hmm. First choice.
This is true.
And
I got first choice, and I picked this for some reason.
Which is what I'm so interested in. From the beginning, I like the whole year. Like, really, of course, you're going to get first choice. You're our first draft pick happens from the beginning.
Yep.
But the whole year, so many wonderful, fantastic films. Not to say this isn't one of them. Of course, I love this film. I'm a human being. But why this is my question.
I don't know. I think this is one of the few things I have nostalgia for. The Back to the Future trilogy. And we can talk about that more as we go on. But this was a movie that I really glommed onto as a kid. And I think that may be why I drew it. But also, I also have nostalgia for the Indiana Jones trilogy. And I didn't pick Last Crusade. Nope. But this is way weirder than Last Crusade. So I think that might be what it was. But yeah, looking at the movies of 89, I wasn't going to talk about Do the Right Thing. I'm sorry. That was just not a good idea.
We would not have allowed that.
And the best picture nominees that year, there's some good ones, but nothing,
you don't want to talk about Driving Miss Daisy? You didn't want to pick that one?
No, but if you do Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, I'll come back for that. Not
allowed. But you could have done Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. You could have done Born on the 4th of July. You could have done so many movies that are interesting and weird. And I guess what kind of struck me, the first things that kind of jumped to mind is one, blank check walked so we can run and jump, and they did it. So that's one thing that I thought, well, thank God we have a good guest for this and we can take a different kind of tack on it. But so that was one thing. And the other thing is it's a sequel. And it's a sequel that's a direct pickup from the movie before it, and there's a direct pickup to the movie after it. It's an odd movie, and of course we're not going to do this, but it is an odd movie to talk about in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to run this series. We're talking about Back to the Future 2. So those are the first two things that kind of jump to mind as Emily has any choice she wants, and kind of pulled out the rib meat of this Back to the Future sandwich.
Yay! No, I think now that I think about it, I think there is a real chance that Robert Zemeckis was my favorite filmmaker when I was 12. Mm-hmm. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Back to the Future films, hugely influential for me. Didn't watch Death Becomes Her, probably would have come out at least 20 years earlier if I had. But it is the queerest movie made by someone who is in no shape or form. Yeah. I don't look at Robert Zemeckis and say, oh, he might be repressing something. I just look at him and I'm like, what the fuck happened there?
Wouldn't you say that this film
who dresses you?
This movie's got some Death Becomes Her energy in it, though.
It does. It does.
Especially in the alternate 85 stuff, for sure. Yeah.
Yes. And then, Forrest Gump was like, it wasn't my favorite movie, but it was the one movie that reliably made me cry. And I still kind of carry a torch for that movie. I understand all the things that are wrong with it, but also I think it is like it has been boiled down to like a conservative manifesto. But if it's a conservative manifesto, then it's like the most dispiriting thing I've ever like in terms of that. I'm fascinated by that movie and all that it stands for. It is a movie that if they ever make the Forrest Gump sequel,
Oh my God.
Gen Z will fully like erase time. Like they'll just be like, the past needs to be done. And they'll erase all of us from existence and start over.
I don't think we will ever do. I don't think we'll ever do our 94 series. I don't think that's where this podcast is going. And I don't think we'll ever do Forrest Gump. Well, we'll see. We'll see. But let's assume we don't, so I can finish this idea.
Okay.
We should talk about Forrest Gump too.
Wait, you want to talk about Forrest Gump on the Back to the Future Part 2 episode?
Not right now.
Oh,
I want to table it. But but as we
Someday.
go on, because I also want to talk about Roger Rabbit, and the two films I don't really want to talk about are the two other Back to the Futures. But the
Get
other
them out of here.
Well, the other two, so I'll go. I want to say one thing about Back to the Future too, and back to the Back to the Future series. So many of these things from the 80s, late 70s, 80s, passed me by. I did not watch them as a kid for whatever reason.
Okay.
And so many of them, and I can tell you, without a hint of nostalgia, that some of them are bad and some of them are good. I think Goonies is pretty bad. And I've never really met anybody who watched it as an adult the first time and thought it was good. I think Spaceballs is pretty terrible. But I watched Back to the Future the first time in my 20s, Back to the Future 2 the first time in my 20s. Weirdly enough, saw Back to the Future 3 in the theater without any context.
Oh my God.
But I think that Back to the Future is one of the greatest movies ever made.
Yeah.
And I think this has absolutely nothing to do with nostalgia. It is spectacular. And I think Back to the Future 2 is the perfect sequel. And I'm crazy about this movie as well. Now, Phil and I talked a little bit about Back to the Future 3, which I think just like fails the first rule of improv. It doesn't, build on anything, and all the fun and excitement of the second movie is kind of lost in the third. So I think it's a real bad conclusion.
It builds on Robert Zemeckis' love of cowboys. Like that's the thing it builds on.
It definitely does.
It runs with that.
And the steampunk train time machine is great.
Cool.
But everything else is just, it's not that, and as I said this to Phil, I don't think it's a bad movie. I think it's a bad Back to the Future movie. But I think these Back to the Future movies are fucking perfect, spectacular. I love them, and I didn't watch them as a kid. So I'm not jaded by it.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting. I watched this film. I watched all three of them relatively recently when, as the aforementioned Blank Check did the Zemeckis series, which was a perfect bomb during the pandemic and all of that. And I watched the three films. I don't watch the third one very often, but I did watch it. And it's not a bad movie, but to your point, Kenny, it's just not a good Back to the Future movie. Like, it wraps everything up fine. It just doesn't have that electricity going on in it.
We only got three of these. So I'm in the animated series, but we only got three of these, and it's just not where it needs to be for me.
I agree. And it's unfortunate because I do think that it's the Doc movie, and I think that Chris Lloyd really brings it in the third one. And I love Mary Steenburgen. Like, there's good stuff in it. It's just I don't know. I just don't care about the West, the old West, and Mad Dog Tannen, and it all just feels a little bit like we're kind of just recycling. It doesn't feel like it's really doing anything new. But anyway,
yes,
yeah,
I would agree. I also was raised without most of the big pop culture of the 70s and 80s. I was not allowed to watch Star Wars. I didn't see that until I was in college, for instance. And it's actually I saw the first one on that re-release they did in '97. So
that's when I saw it the first time.
Yeah, and I have caught up with a lot of this as an adult. Like I think Ghostbusters is fine, but I don't get the fervor over it. I've seen a similar thing happening as I get older with like the movie Space Jam. And this is going to be a tangent, but like there's all these kids who are like not even kids. They're like in their like late 20s, early 30s. And they're like, Space Jam is a perfect movie. And some of them have like good arguments for it, but like most of it just boils down to when I was a kid, this was doing a thing that I needed. And like, I get that. Like when I was a kid, the Back to the Future movies were doing a thing that I needed, and that's why I have nostalgia for them. But also, like, I rewatched all of them as an adult a few times, and like they hold up for me in a way that some of the other movies I loved as a kid just don't. To your point, Kenny, I watched these movies initially in reverse order. I watched them 3, 2, 1. To the degree that for a lot of my childhood, 3 was my favorite because that was the first one I'd seen. That was my first exposure to a lot of the tropes the series uses. And now, I realize that they get a little bit worse as they go, but I think 1 and 2 are both really great.
I did too. So I had like, it's the weirdest thing because again, my parents took me to see 3 sans context. It was 1990, and I guess, what are you going to do with this kid who all he wants to do is go to the movies? So I was introduced to the fading pictures through that movie, for instance, and I always remember the the Clint Eastwood thing that happened in 3 before I saw the seeding of it in 2.
Yeah,
and so I never hated 3. I just but the other thing is I wonder if you have this. Doesn't sound like you have it Back to the Future, but for other movies. The other thing is, and Phil, you might have it for things too, when you don't grow up with these movies, you really do kind of resent the fandom and almost root against it. So I always felt a little alienated by the Back to the Future fandom because it is so specific. I never understood the term gigawatts. And when someone would say gigawatts, I found that very, very, alienating and exclusive.
Sure. Yeah. Excluding.
Yes. And I didn't really want to love these movies, but I just do. Just like I love them so much, and I can't think of. I can't think of any movies that I could rewatch over and over again without looking at my phone, just being happy the whole time. I'm genuinely happy when I watch these 2 movies.
I have a slightly different perspective from you guys, and perhaps which is that I watched this. This was a staple. The first Back to the Future movie was a staple for me as a kid. I watched it incessantly. So much so that when they announced that this was coming, that 2 and 3 were coming out, and I posted this on Twitter yesterday, the teaser poster for this movie, I couldn't even articulate for you how excited I was just by that poster. There was a movie theater, or there's a Cineplex Odeon, as you guys might know, is sort of the big theater chain in Canada. And their headquarters, they would have a whole bunch of movie posters outside the building. And my dad's house used to be near there. And whenever we drove past it, I just locked on that poster as the car drove by. Like I was that excited about this movie. And I would honestly say that the second movie was just everything I wanted it to be at 9 years old. Like it was just like the greatest. And then the third one came out and I saw it in the theater and I was like, sure, fine. Like it left no impression on me. It's a very, unfortunately, forgettable movie, I feel like. But this movie is really sort of, I'm curious if you guys feel this way too, but like it does feel like it does everything a sequel is supposed to do, right? Like it doubles down on all the stuff that you love about the first one and it finds a new way into it. Like when I think about them going back to 55, and us getting to see scenes that fill in some of the, not holes, but like fills in some backstory, like seeing Biff when he actually had his car fixed and talking to Lorraine on the street, all these things that make the first one better in its own way. Do you know what I mean? Like they're working towards each other to make a better thing, which is all you can expect from a sequel.
Yeah. Go ahead, Emily. All right, I'll go ahead. First time probably ever I watched this movie with a slight bit of an analytical eye, and this movie's very clearly broken down into 3 parts, 3 acts. in 3 distinct locations. And the first one is kind of this promise of, where we're going. We have there, we don't need roads, which is wonderful, which is exactly what you're there for. I think the beginning of this movie with the Sylvester score and the flying is as wonderful as it gets, and the lightning, it's as cool as it gets. I couldn't like it more. I love 2015. I think it's perfect. I love the stuff they got right. I love the stuff they got wrong. I think it's so charming. I think I think what's young Biff's name? Griff. I think Griff's crazy ass fucking out of the Fifth Element screaming Mad Max shit is so awesome. It's great. I think the girl who grabs Marty by the crotch has always had done this weird thing for me. Always been quite into her. I absolutely love that. Then I think part of the reason the expository dialogue works is because all the stuff they don't tell you, which is specifically, it assumes in this third act, encyclopedic down to the molecule knowledge of what happened in the first movie. And that alone makes you feel so smart and so seen as a Back to the Future aficionado, that all the stuff where, Doc or even Marty or anybody else is just telling you how it is, doesn't feel so bad because you know that they trust you. So I'm crazy about this. The structure, the way it's done, the way
I think it's I fully agree with you. I think watching it this time, I was a lot more analytical about it for obvious reasons because I knew that we were going to talk about it, and I was just really floored by how seamless it does what it does. There's a reason why I feel like it's the template for time travel stuff, right? Like it is just, when I think about the chalkboard scene, when he just clearly explains an alternate timeline. I mean, Carl Sagan thinks that this is still the best, like up until his death, obviously, felt as though this was the template for explaining alternate realities, alternate timelines. I mean, it's really clear and easy to understand, which I think says something because I find time travel stuff generally melts my brain and I find it very hard to understand.
It's incredibly easy to understand.
Right? Like it's so smartly done. And I don't know. Emily, what are your thoughts on the timeline stuff?
I don't
or
think
just the movie in general.
I don't think that's the first example of explaining things with a chalkboard. Obviously, that's been done before, but I feel like that is the thing that has survived this movie. It pops up everywhere. Like there's a version of it in Interstellar that's like, here's how time dilation works, and I'm gonna draw it on a thing. There's something about it that if you have an actor who can deliver the dialogue is just endlessly engaging, because you're like, I'm going to the movies and what I really want is to sit through a college level class. Like that's what I was hoping for when I sat down. But if you have the right actor, it just works. And Christopher Lloyd's the right actor. I don't know that I think this is a perfect movie. There is a little bit about it that's a little, I don't know. There's a little bit about it that I find a little bit cynical in terms of how it is appropriating the idea of a sequel. And yet I love the meta aspect of it, where it's like, okay, you want a sequel? Here's the first movie literally done again, except we're going to add this other layer over it. Yeah. I love that shit. I think if this movie sags a little bit for me, it's in that dystopian 85, which is cool, but I kind of get the point. And like, when you look at the deleted scenes, most of them are from dystopian 85, because it does drag a bit.
I feel you, and I always kind of dread that part, right? Because it's very ugly. It's like a very ugly, nasty part. It's very Biff-centric. What they do to Lorraine is like dispiriting, and it's upsetting. What I felt this time was it was shorter in duration than I had remembered. That might not be a great thing for the movie, right? That it holds this outside place in your memory of it, but it is pretty in and out and quick. And the actual business of the scene, the stuff between Marty and Biff and Marty escaping, and I always loved him jumping off the roof onto the DeLorean, and I think there's a lot of great stuff there. But yes, it's not it's probably the nastiest part of the entire trilogy.
It does feel like that's the second act thing you want to do, though, right? Like, not just within this movie, but within the trilogy as a whole. The idea that you do want to sort of sense the kind of our heroes are trapped and the darkness of it. You have to do it. But sorry, Emily, didn't mean to cut you off.
There isn't there is an element of it that has aged the best of anything in any of these movies, because at the time it was out, people were like, well, this is very over the top, obvious satire. And now it was our reality for 4 years, like literally living in Biff Tannen world. And like Biff Tannen was literally based on Donald Trump. And you're just like, okay, apparently.
It's so prescient. It's terrifying.
You know what was so interesting to me that I loved, and I couldn't believe it, because again, there are things that are wildly wrong and things that are wildly right, and the way the bikers flocked spoke to something that Zemeckis and Gale seem to understand about capitalism and white men prone to violence. That I don't think people like it's not so much. I think this is something that we've realized the last few years. It's not so much that the strong men raised an army. It's that the army flock to the strong men.
Yep.
And that's a thing that really has upset me and scared me over the last, few years. I don't think anyone really understood that. I think this goes to conservative ideology, this idea of, Soros is always paying these trauma actors to come because they couldn't understand the notion that people genuinely feel things, right? And if you ever want anyone to do anything, you got to pay them to show up. But that's not true. It's not true with the alleged trauma actors, and it's not true with these people who are drawn to a strong man and just looking for a fight.
Yeah.
So I think that was really interesting.
I thought it was. Yeah. Sorry. Go on.
I only transitioned because George Soros paid me a sweet $100,000.
How much? I gotta know.
No.
That's an exclusive Patreon content.
I think that there is something in like Lucas, Spielberg, Zemeckis are kind of this trilogy of directors at this time, and like Lucas is like an old school granola hippie. And Spielberg is very like neoliberal shill. And like they're both, on the left, but they're kind of older stereotypes of on the left. Zemeckis is very torn between like outright communism and like outright libertarianism. Like there is an element of him that can never decide if he's super into Bernie Sanders or super into Donald Trump. And I think in his best movies, he walks that line beautifully. And honestly, his best and his worst movies, he walks that line in such an interesting way. Like his Christmas Carol movie, which I talked about on Blank Check, a podcast I've never heard of until this show, is this like really strange attempt to tap into the themes of that book, which are anti-capitalist, but also be like the most capitalist movie you've ever seen. And like,
right,
yeah.
There is a thing in him that is like, I just want unchecked government, but I'm not sure if I want that or I want the most government ever. And like, I find that fascinating.
Well, it's this weird thing. It's this weird modern thing where like, God, I mean, we see it all the time now where you have these guys who would self-identify as more left than right. Mm-hmm. Like a Bezos would self-identify as more left than right. Elon Musk, up until maybe a week ago, would have self-identified as more left than right. There are a lot of these people who would Zuckerberg, I think all of them basically would self-identify as more left than right, who are kind of like, yeah, we're into a certain level of social democracy, but let's not include us in that.
The most of that in any director is Brad Bird, who's like,
I was just gonna say, yeah.
He's like, there is a huge streak about him that's super lefty, and then also he's like, you know what? I'm the only person in the world who can make a good movie, and you're like, okay, Brad Bird.
There's this exceptionalism component
I've soured on him even more since our Iron Giant conversations. He's yes, you're right, Emily. He is the most of that, and his movies are not Back to the Future. So like, this goes back to my, again, we're on Patreon. Doug Allen's never gonna hear this, but this goes back to my old entourage thing, which is like, you can be an asshole now this isn't true anymore, but this is what I felt 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You could be an asshole if you're making Mad Men, but if you're making Entourage, come on, man. So like,
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that Matt Weiner would agree with you.
well, Matt Weiner would have agreed.
Yeah, I agree.
That's why That's why he thought he should have been allowed to sleep with Cater. What's her last name?
Oh my God, Kate. Oh fuck.
There you go. That's the point.
Cater Gordon. Cater Gordon.
Cater Gordon. Yeah, because he thought he should get what he wants because he made Mad Men.
Yeah.
You know, but
let me give a brief synopsis of this movie for the people that might not have seen it. In this
What's Mad Men about, Phil?
I'm going to tell you all about Mad Men. In this zany sequel, time-traveling duo Marty McFly and Dr. Emmett Brown return from saving Marty's future son from disaster only to discover their own time transformed. In this nightmarish version of Hill Valley, Marty's father has been murdered and Biff Tannen, Marty's nemesis, has profited. After uncovering the secret to Biff's success, a sports almanac from the future, Marty and Doc embark on a quest to embark on a quest to repair the space-time continuum. Back to the Future Part 2 opened on November 22nd, 1989 in first place against Harlem Nights, The Little Mermaid, Look Who's Talking, and Steel Magnolias. It's quite the...
you could have done Little Mermaid.
Yeah, you could have done Little Mermaid. I'm like,
I think
we have somebody coming for it, but it would go on to make $336 million on a $40 million budget. It's got 66% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, 85% from audiences. A very brief clip from Roger Ebert's 3-star review.
Phil, this was the second highest grossing movie of the year?
This was the first highest grossing film of the year.
First time. So this beat Last Crusade. Okay.
Correct.
Wow.
Back to the Future Part 2 is an exercise in goofiness, an excursion into various versions of the past and future that is so baffling that even the characters are constantly trying to explain it to each other. I should have brought a big yellow legal pad to the screening so I could have detailed notes just to keep the timeline straight. And yet the movie is fun mostly because it's so screwy. Part 2, for all its craziness, lacks the genuine power of the original. The story of the 85 film has real heart to it. If Marty didn't travel from 85 to 55 and arrange for his parents to have their first date, he might not even exist. The time travel in that film involved his own emotional confrontation with his parents as teenagers. Part 2, on the other hand, is mostly just zaniness and screwball jokes, but on that level, it's fun. I'm not sure he's giving it enough credit. But I do want to say that the tone of this film is decidedly different than the first film. The first film is really kind of its own thing, right? They never intended on making sequels to it. The to be continued at the end of it was a joke, although I don't quite understand what the joke is.
Did they add it for the video?
That's what they said.
Yeah.
So I don't really
added it for the video.
I do know that the where we're going, we don't need roads, and the DeLorean flying off was intended to be a nothing, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. There was no plan for that.
And in hindsight, Bob Gale and Zemeckis have been quite open about the fact that they wish they didn't have Jennifer there. They wish that they could have gone on a cleaner. If they were going to do a sequel, they would not have had Jennifer in the final scene at the end of the first one because they felt indebted or felt forced in bringing her on the journey. I personally don't think they necessarily needed to do that. I mean, there's any number of ways of being able to sort of, refresh, restart the second film if you wanted to. They just chose to have a direct pickup.
So yeah, the way, I guess, if you're not going to really write her into the movie, you should just cut to a wide shot as they're flying off and show this body dropping from the car and just have them be like, yay, it's just the boys again. But if you're actually going to have her in the movie, do more with her than just have her be like, I'm young, I'm old. And then the thing where they're like, well, we left her asleep on a porch. She's probably fine.
Well, the thing that's kind of funny is they did what you're talking about more or less, except they had her be annoying first. So it wasn't just let's kick her out for being a girl. It's like, it's girls are terrible. You keep this girl around, she's gonna talk our ear off. So
there's some clumsiness in the way that they when they get to 2015, why doesn't Doc just keep her in the car? There's no reason for Doc to take her out of the car, to leave her, other than because they need it to happen for plot purposes. As opposed, there's just a bunch of sort of logistics that. Is everything okay, Emily? Oh, okay. Do you know sort of what I'm getting at, Kenny? Like, there's some weird logistical stuff that happens when like Doc has to like run away and he drops this. Like, it's all kind of weird.
It's so clunky in the beginning.
Yes.
And there's the thing about the first one is it really is kind of a Swiss watch.
Yeah.
And this one is not.
No.
And part of that is because of this, ill-fitting Jennifer piece that they decided not to like build the watch around. They decided to just like kind of, extract it as soon as they could, which always kind of rubbed me the wrong way too. Yeah. Like I think that they would probably say, this is about two people. This is about Doc and Marty. That's the clean version. And that's what the story we wanted to tell.
Yep.
But one, it does come off as misogynistic, but two, it also comes off as just kind of anti-story.
Yes.
And it doesn't understand. It doesn't understand that, at least in the first movie, there is some emotional stakes in Marty and Jennifer, and the audience does come to like her and care about her, and she is there at the end of that movie, and there is a little bit of someone is joining the team. There's going to be a new Avenger in the next movie that I think is kind of exciting. That's it. A missed opportunity doesn't feel like harsh enough. It's a bad decision. But I think it would have freshened up the movie even more, and the movie could have handled it.
I totally agree. I think that, so in doing a little bit of research on the development of this film, there's a bunch of stuff I kind of wanted to talk about because I do think that it informs the film that we got. First and foremost, Zemeckis is off making Who Framed Roger Rabbit and tells Bob Gale to write a screenplay essentially and bring it back to me and I'll give you notes or whatever. Bob Gale writes a script that involves 1967. And there's this version where Marty meets up with his parents who are college students in the 60s and they're hippies and they're all like protest era. But like, it doesn't really match up time-wise. They'd be too old. It doesn't really actually make any sense. So there's like kind of this weird kind of, so Zemeckis kind of threw that away and was like, let's not do that. Then the kind of big elephant in the room is that Crispin Glover essentially gets into a weird pissing contest about payment and how much he gets paid, and he fires his agents and he hires new agents. He makes a pretty much ridiculous demands like give me $1 million and I get script approval and stuff that they were just never going to give him. So they essentially write him out of the movie. You really feel his absence in these films. He's so fucking, I did anyway. Like, I love him in that first movie. I think that George McFly is a tremendous performance.
I do too. I'm not saying I don't.
And I do feel like killing George gives you something, but takes something away, right? Like it gives you that pain that Marty feels. And I like that. It certainly adds an interesting flavor to Marty's character. So when he does see him in the 55 stuff at the end of this film, it does have an emotional component there, which I really like. But I also just feel like George could have been a great additional plot device that isn't used. Did you guys miss him in these films?
They never cracked Marty's character arc in either of these sequels. And that's fine. I don't think 2 needs him to have a character arc to work. The character arc of Back to the Future 2 is Robert Zemeckis. He's the character arc. You're like, is he going to pull this off? Like that's that's the bar you're looking at.
Totally.
But like they are like, well, Marty McFly hates being called a chicken. And then, okay, I guess. But like, you compare it to the first. You compare it to the first movie, and the first movie is like, oh, Marty, it doesn't really know his parents. Yeah. And he's going to get to know his parents. He's going to get to see that they're horny. And like, there's just like a whole element of character growth there that just doesn't happen in the sequel. And I think when you sort of identify the thing with Jennifer, it is that, you could watch this movie and it could be about the ways in which we become our parents, as opposed to the ways in which our parents were once us. And like, if Jennifer's in the movie, you kind of get there, but instead it does convoluted stuff, and that's fun. Again, I don't want to complain. I love this movie, but it is definitely like there are missed opportunities for a sequel that has some of the emotional depth of the first film.
Totally.
I also feel like Marty is kind of, I completely agree with you, Emily, that like they never fully crack him, but they also never fully make me understand necessarily what Jennifer sees in him as well a little bit.
Oh, come on. Marty McFly?
Well, do you?
He's a handsome boy.
He's the coolest.
Well, hold on.
This
Maybe
dude effortlessly gets on a hoverboard.
You're right. You're right. I can't. I take that
plays
back.
the
I take that
guitar.
back. I guess what I wanted to say.
Friends with an old scientist, which I'm not making a joke. That's very cool.
The nice thing about it too is that Jennifer can put on like a fanny pack and just put him in there and like carry him around. It's nice.
It's true. He is pocket sized. I'll say this. What I meant to say about Marty is there is, especially it's highlighted in this film, there's a little bit of a moral gray zone with him, a little bit, in terms of what he wants to do with the almanac, and there's a little bit of that, which I think is interesting. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I'm not sure that they fully unpack it. Like, there is this idea of Marty grappling with success, I guess, or what that means and that kind of stuff, but I'm not sure that it ever totally lands that idea.
Yeah, and it doesn't, like, Biff continues to just place bets on sporting events, even though, like, what he's done to the timeline would have ripples. So, like, things would stop being, especially if, like, sports betting becomes that, like, there's going to be all sorts of uncertainty introduced into this scenario. So, I'm not actually complaining about this. I don't give a fuck. Like, it works. It works for the movie that Biff Tannen is omniscient.
Totally.
That's the fundamental thing about this movie is so many things could just be hand waved away with. Well, I don't really give a fuck, because like I do like this movie more than almost any movie I can think of. And this is another thing I wanted to talk about. It's just a magic trick. And your point about this being Robert Zemeckis' arc is true. It's a magic trick where he actually like lands the prestige, and it's hard to believe. Like, that's why that third act is so thrilling to me. Particularly, like, there's nothing better than going back to the clock tower, seeing the climax of the first one, and then immediately having nude Marty run up to Doc.
Oh, it's the best.
What a wonderful, awesome, incredible, exciting moment that really gets you excited for the third movie until they show you that god-awful trailer.
Which cuts the legs out from underneath the cliffhanger too, right? Like, why would you jam that trailer into the... It's bizarre.
It's one of my favorite... It's Empire Strikes Back level of like how cool that ending is with the with the Joe Faraday thing and all that stuff.
It's great.
And then to just... Could you imagine if Empire Strikes Back ended with shots of Endor? How upsetting would that be?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is also, from a production level, it's worth saying, from a production standpoint, was shot back to back. It was done that way for Michael J. Fox's for Family Ties, which he was shooting concurrently. It was done that way for cost purposes and what have you. But I don't necessarily know that it actually does. It certainly doesn't do the third one any favors, because it kind of, I think they just thought it was like a serial or something, and they could kind of just jam these two together, because they're only separated by, I mean, release date wise, they're only separated by about 6 months, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was November and May, so it's not even 6 months really. So it's
Thanksgiving to Memorial Day, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, my guess is that Back to the Future 2 is in theaters probably until about maybe a month before the third one comes out.
Yeah. Wasn't didn't Superman have something similar to this, where they shot a lot of Superman 2 during or some? Well,
it might have.
It has a Superman 2 vibe to me, because Superman is so big and so, grand, and then Superman 2, which people like, it looks like it's shot on a fucking ride at Universal Studios.
The Superman 2 thing is, Richard Donner came in and shot a movie, and they were like, we want this to be goofier. So they brought in a new
Richard
director
Lester,
to like shoot a whole bunch of... So like, it wasn't quite the same thing, but it definitely had like similar production fun behind it.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that happened in that thing you're talking about is these reshoots were shot on a shoestring budget. So the climax of Superman 2 is so cheap looking. I absolutely despise looking at that. And I know this isn't the case for Back to the Future, but I feel the same way, knowing, particularly in Hollywood, but I think you sense this no matter what, that, Back to the Future 2 has these three distinct locations, these 3 distinct set pieces that have so much thought and care put into the production design, and into the ingenuity and the inventiveness of everything going on. And 3, they just went to the Disney Ranch and just used what was there. There's no there isn't, because it's just the past. It's there's nothing inventive about it, and it's so incredibly stale and
it's stagnant
and lifeless, just compared to the other ones. There's virtually the DeLoreans in the fucking shop the whole time. I mean, there's just there's no chaos with the Sports Almanac, good, bad, or otherwise. There was this chaos element that
totally
they were essentially driving around this nuclear time bomb that just doesn't exist in the third one.
Well, the Almanac really gives you a bunch of great stuff too. Like, it gives you a bunch of. As I was watching it yesterday, I was taken with all these moments of quiet moments of Marty sneaking around trying to get this book. There's suspenseful kind of moments in there. There's car chases. There's what have you. The third one, and I don't want to keep comparing them, but I will just say that the third one, it does have a really great train sequence at the end, but ultimately never really takes flight. It never really gets exciting. It just feels, as your point, very, very staid.
I mean, it's back when Westworld started, the HBO version. One of my friends was like, "Who cares about the Old West? Why isn't it fantasy world or whatever?" And I think that's kind of what happens with Back to the Future 3. Is Zemeckis and Gale just made a really good Western, not really good, but you know what I mean. They made a very faithful Western. They
fun Western.
They hit the tropes of the genre. They had a lot of fun with it. And the further we get from 1990, the fewer people there are who are like, yes, I want just a good programmer Western from 1944. Because the Westerns that have survived are the ones that are kind of do interesting things with the form, or, are revisionist or things like that. Yeah. And we just don't have that kind of storytelling anymore. It's like if there's another Back to the Future trilogy in 2060, and they decide, oh, we're going to make the third one a superhero movie. And at that point, superhero movies have fallen out of favor. It would feel weird in that way. It is a very okay boomer movie. And I like it a lot, but that's what it is.
You're talking about the third Back to the Future 3. Yeah. I think your Westwood point is really interesting. Yeah. And, when you said that about your friend, my gut reaction as an asshole was, well, it's based on a book and a movie from. Well, it's not a book; it was a movie, but a movie from the 70s. So, that's the point, and that's an interesting thing. I never really realized what a missed opportunity Westworld was to make it a modern day fantasy, because that's all it is, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but the entertainment industry is obsessed with mining intellectual property, because it thinks that if you have a title on there that you might have heard of before, you might want to watch it based on that.
Right. The thing is, I think most people from our generation are most familiar with Westworld from Itchy and Scratchy Land. So... I can't believe the Westworld even kind of worked. I don't think it's good. I don't enjoy it, but I definitely hit about as hard as a show like Ozark, which is kind of like that second tier thing that had that's enough to keep going, and enough people in kind of
Emily's favorite show, Ozark.
Tastemaker circles.
Love Ozark.
Do you love Ozark?
No, I don't at all.
No, I think that's the point I'm making, which is or a Showtime show. These things that are kind of these second tier prestige things that people watch, but not you.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, I think the clear example of that is House of Cards, where a lot of people watched it, but it was just very much it felt like a thing that was made to replicate another thing.
Yeah, and I hate that show so much with all my heart. But yeah.
Oh, I absolutely I dislike House of Cards, and one of my best friends had a character arc on House of Cards, and I desperately went back when I started hanging out with her to be like, did I say shitty things about it? I did not, reader.
There you go.
I did not.
It's that's as someone who spouts opinions on a regular basis. and also has friends in the industry. That's just the minefield we're in.
It's true.
You know, and I haven't lost a friend yet.
I do want to just briefly comment on. I do think that shooting the two films back to back helped them production wise and budget wise, but there's a bunch of stuff that got cut from this film, from various drafts of this film, that first of all I'm thankful got cut, but also show that like where things were going in Hollywood to a certain degree. There was a sequence in the hoverboard chase where Marty grabs onto a flying car that pulls him into the sky and like almost out into space. And then Doc rescues him in like a flying van of some sort. There's also a moment when...
That sounds great.
Then there's also Marty and Doc fly the DeLorean into an array of power lines over the Grand Canyon to generate enough power to return to 1985. These are just like... The reason I bring this up is... What I like about these films is they're not particularly set-piecey. Other than your train sequence at the end of the third one, I like that you don't really have these big, overblown, expensive set pieces. If they made more Back to the Futures, I think we'd have so much more of that. Okay. And I think that I like how small these movies are for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, I think that's what the cartoon was.
Correct.
You know, with Jules and Verne.
Yes. There was also apparently a you might like this, Kenny, because it's sports oriented.
There was me. I'm Mr. Sports over here.
Mr. Sporto. There was apparently going to be a sport called slam ball that would be played in an anti-gravity chamber and combine handball and roller derby. So there you go.
There was actually a sport called slam ball.
There you go.
That was very similar to what you're talking about. It was maybe a early 2000s Spike TV thing.
Really?
Which was essentially basketball on trampolines, but like with like a lot of gear so you don't, die.
Hurt yourself, sure.
Yeah.
So can I ask you both a question about the future stuff, the 2015 stuff? Because I saw this as a kid. You guys saw this when you were, kid adjacent.
I saw it as a kid.
Okay,
I did see it as a kid. But yeah, I saw it. I just saw it in reverse order.
I was kid adjacent.
This movie, the future in this movie looked exactly how I wanted it to look as a 9-year-old kid. Like I don't say that I know that sounded judgy. I don't mean it that way. It's just very colorful. It's very positive.
Wait, judgy of who?
No, just because I think that Zemeckis talked about how the way that he approached the future, that he didn't want to do it because he feels like future movies never predict things right. So he didn't really want to do that. So he kind of created this sort of, not utopian, but this very sort of like accessible, playful kind of future that I think became kind of the future for a long time, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like people modeled the future after this movie.
It is explicitly not attempting to predict the future. And they did try to sort of predict where certain things were going. They got some things right. They came close on some other things. They missed some things. It is explicitly trying to adapt Tomorrowland at Disneyland, I think.
Yes.
And I think that's the vibe it's going for. And that is why it works, because it is not really trying to create a real 2015. It was trying to create our hope of what the future will be. And I think that that's one of the reasons it remains timeless, even though now it's in the past, is because it has this feeling of everything in these movies is inspired by pop culture of the 50s. And that is a very 50s vision of the future, just as Back to the Future 3 is a very 50s Western. It's just, the further we get from the 50s, the Western gain, or the further we get from when these movies came out, the Western falls in favor, and sci-fi has just continued to get more popular. So the future elements kind of hold up in a weird way.
I agree with that. Yeah.
I think people have gotten less precious about the idea of futuristic movies need to predict the future.
Totally.
I think that was a thing back then where people would, kind of point and laugh at Days of Future Past. And say, you got this wrong, aren't you dumb? But now I think people are kind of charmed by it. I'm certainly charmed by it. The one thing that is not charming, and he got totally right, was how corporatized the whole thing is.
Yeah. The product placement's crazy. For its time, it's crazy. And
it is crazy. and knowing nothing, I wonder how much of that was paid for.
Yeah. Yep.
Or how much of that they just kind of said, this is what's going to happen, which is kind of, everyone knows this, but that's kind of what happened.
The only two I know they got paid for was Pepsi and Pizza Hut. Now, I don't know about the others, but those were the two that, because apparently the Pizza Hut, the demands that Pizza Hut made for the sequence where she puts the pizza into that hydration machine and it expands, they wanted it to look very specific. Okay. I mean, they got what they wanted.
And Pizza Hut was owned by Pepsi at that point. So like they probably cut a single deal across the corporation,
all right.
blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I don't know. I am not somebody who gets like super upset about product placement. And I think this is a movie where it's kind of thematically necessary.
Yeah,
so
me too.
Props to Pizza Hut.
Well, it is thematically necessary.
Totally.
I'm not somebody who gets upset about product placement either.
Neither do I.
Whatever. But
I think when people whine about it, I just say, who cares? Come on. Be like me and don't care about things. Don't care about the corporatization of your present. Just be okay with it. Just be fine with it.
I agree.
It's good.
I agree.
Life is life.
Yeah.
I think that it is interesting, though, that it's really only in this portion of the film in 2015 that we have all of the product placement. It kind of falls away in the alternate version, and it falls away, obviously, in 55. It's just interesting to say that it feels as though they're making a commentary, right? The future's going to have more stuff like this. And they were right.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting
also, if you're like a corporate brand, you want to be in the future. You want to be like Pepsi will still be there.
You're right.
You want to be the Taco Bell of
Demolition Man.
Yeah. This is a sidebar I've almost certainly talked about on this program before, but have you ever read the Wikipedia page that asserts that the Taco Bell dog exists in the Star Wars universe?
Yo quiero Taco Bell?
Yeah, because they did a promotion for Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, with Colonel Sanders, the Taco Bell dog, and someone called Pizza Hut Girl, because there was not a Pizza Hut mascot, wherein they are like fighting the whatever evil forces it is, and apparently they're in like some battle somewhere. So canonically, because Phantom Menace is canon Star Wars, the Taco Bell dog exists in the Star Wars universe.
But does Pizza Hut Girl also exist in the Star Wars universe?
Yes, and Pizza Hut Girl and Colonel Sanders. Yes.
Yeah. I think you can pretty much Kevin Bacon out Colonel Sanders throughout all of pop culture.
6 degrees of Colonel Sanders?
I'm pretty confident of that. So.
I do think that, the future stuff in this movie was people were so excited about it. It was like, it's still the thing that is most remembered about this film is what I would argue is maybe 20 minutes of screen time. Probably
it's nothing.
Right?
It's virtually nothing. I think it's definitely less than 30.
It's pretty amazing.
It's all over the promotional materials for this film. And what's more, the stuff people remember is maybe about 5 minutes. Yeah. The hoverboard stuff, the like town square stuff. When you get to Marty's house, there's some future tech stuff, but it's just kind of like, what a boring life.
Well, that's another thing about this series that I'm totally blown away by is how lower class the McFlys are. Mm-hmm. Phil and I both happen to recently watch Ready Player One, where
Emily and I went to see that together in the theater.
I got a story about that, but go on.
Well, all I'm saying is very often you have these people, science fiction heroes, come from the lowest of the low, like in Ready Player One, right? Mm-hmm. Or they come from royalty. Mm-hmm. But you very rarely have people coming from lower class families that are making ends meet. But that's an interesting thing, and through the years to see how that kind of family lives, and the chip on Marty's shoulder that comes from that upbringing in that town, I think was really interesting. The kind of thing where he would get upset if you call him a chicken, and he's not so impoverished where he can't worry about that shit, where he just has to worry about kind of basic survival things. So that's that's a really interesting decision, I think, that they made, to have the socioeconomic status imbue this entire series, and actually be a commentary on modern life at that time. You know, there are a lot of E.T. Obviously, Elliot doesn't come from, you know, he comes from a lower middle class background, but it's incidental in that.
You know what's interesting about that is that the bee in Crispin Glover's bonnet about this series, and one of the reasons why he's not in 2 and 3, is his beef that this movie or this franchise was too much about, you know, capitalism and having nice things and pushing for this sort of stuff, which is kind of funny because I actually don't think it's that at all. Like, I don't think this series is really that at all.
I think that ending of that first movie is very heavy Reagan era satire. But
Sure,
I think that's the thing Zemeckis always runs into is he does these things he intends to be satirical and everyone's like, oh, look, you're celebrating capitalism. Something about his approach, I think it's his love of fancy, shiny toys, makes everyone think he's celebrating Reagan-style capitalism. And by the way, Phil, when you said the bee in Crispin Glover's bonnet, I thought you were going to say the B and B movie is also middle class, and that's technically true. I was like, we're going to go on a tangent, but I love
the worker bee, right? Yeah. Yeah, that feels more like Banana Republic, right? That's, you got a queen, and you got all these other people bees living in one hive together. That's
Are you guys surprised that we didn't get a chain of Cafe 80s or something along those lines? Like, I'm surprised that this wasn't monetized more in a weird way. Possibly that's because of the people
and disappointed.
Involved, I love Cafe 80s. I'd love a Cafe 80s.
It was too close to the actual time when the movie came out. And I think that this movie went through a phase where people thought of it as sort of disreputable. You know, this and the third one were like, well, they weren't as good. So like, and now it's sort of being rediscovered. And at this point, we're kind of phasing out of the 80s nostalgia that seemed to take over for about 15 years.
And phasing into 90s nostalgia.
Yeah.
We're
well,
phasing
you know
into
what?
90s nostalgia.
Now we're skipping over to 2000s nostalgia. And as a child of the 90s, I'm mad about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that
agree.
can't be true. I want to talk about this for a second.
Go for it.
That can't be true.
Olivia Rodrigo.
I feel like, oh my God, that's horrifying. I feel like the 80s and the 90s at some point became one. Okay. And in terms of the pop culture. Now, I say this as someone who worked on a show that was a 90s nostalgia show.
A nice show. I like that.
A good show. I like that show.
You're the best. I appreciate that. It's the best show I've ever worked on by far. And my favorite. But we were a little bit bleeding edge on that, right? There wasn't 90s nostalgia before that. We were only going back. I think we were doing one year's thing. We were going back approximately 20 years. And we were maybe a little too early. And then so that was like 2015. I think the last like 5, 6, 7 years have been heavy 90s. I think this Britney Spears thing we're going through right now is like a heavy 90s thing. Girls 5 Ever is heavy 90s.
Right.
And
I so little of it is like, you know, like you look at 80s stuff and you had, you know, Stranger Things, you had The Americans. Like there was this whole cycle of the 80s as parody. The 80s is like, we're going to take it a little bit seriously. The 80s is prestige drama that we just never have gotten with the, maybe we'll get there, but it feels like we didn't even have those, like the Britney Spears thing is obviously a huge story right now, but like it's a news story. It's not like a show where everyone's like, look at this, I got some pogs. And then they're like, I can snap my bracelet on my wrist. And everyone's like,
where's my hypercolor t-shirt? Yeah.
I'm going to listen to grunge.
That's a great point. And I guess the question would be, I'm not disputing it. This is an open question. All right. So again, when we did Hindsight, we were kind of, first through and kind of trying to figure this out. Very short after that, Halpert and Shoemaker did Surviving Jack, which is a very similar type thing, and playing with the same stuff. And I never talked to Patrick about it, though I'd like to. We were both kind of flying blind in terms of what is the 90s nostalgia that people will give a shit about. Like we're going to take our best shots. Like we thought people might care about rave culture. Turns out not really. We thought people might care about zine culture. Not really. what are those things? Because I think by the time Stranger Things came out, like people were like, "Yup, Stephen King and Spielberg, people give a fucking shit about." So just imbue it with that. So what are those things?
It's not pop culture. It's the internet. You look at what unites 90s and 2000s nostalgia, because what we're really nostalgic for is 1995 to 2005. We're not really nostalgic for the grunge era, and we're not really nostalgic for the MySpace era. We're nostalgic for the early internet, and like, how do you turn that into a TV show or a movie? Like, but I also think that is part of why nostalgia kind of stops in the 80s, because there is, and obviously not for all time, there will be other things set in other eras, but there is this sort of fear in Hollywood that once you get to the 90s, once everything starts to splinter, suddenly like there aren't universal experiences. And the universal experiences we have about the past are traditionally extremely white, extremely male, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like we sort of know that. But by the time you get to the 90s, that becomes super evident. And the internet then just splits everything into subcultures, you know? Like, and that makes it hard to do a period piece in the same way you can do like, it's 1985 and we all love Rocky IV.
Yeah, I hear that.
I'm literally writing that right now.
I have a show in development that takes place in 97, and you know what I mean. And we absolutely understood all the stuff that you're talking about, Emily. That it's a weird thing in the 90s where you have to kind of pick what portion of it you want to talk about. The thing that I have almost sold like 15 times at this point is set in the 90s. And is explicitly about a certain thing in the 90s. And you get to like lower level execs and they're like, oh, great. This is like, yes, the 90s. I love this. And you get to the higher level and they're like, is this what people are nostalgic for from the 90s? We're not sure. Right.
You know,
right.
like,
yeah.
I don't know. I think the thing that is trying to create a nostalgia play almost never works, but trying to create a thing that feels like how you feel about that period, that often works. Stranger Things is like not made by people who really lived through that era. It's made by people who have strong feelings about Stephen King and Steven Spielberg, and that's why it works. The Americans is like specifically not about the 80s. It's just set then. And like, well, yeah, I mean, I think that's the point.
And Stranger Things is a pastiche of so many things too. Yes. Like everyone has a thing they can kind of glom onto. But I absolutely agree with you. I speaking of sort of genre and what have you, I wanted to ask what you guys thought of the way this film tees up the third one, the Wild Gunman arcade game, the Clint Eastwood stuff. I like it because I don't think it's particularly heavy-handed. But did it work for you this time around?
Yeah, I like these two as a set, even as I admit that the third one is not as good as the second. I like the way that they're in conversation with each other. Yeah, it's an interesting thing I haven't seen a lot of movies do. Yeah.
No, I absolutely love it, and that's the biggest mistake was that little trailer thing. Without it, it would have been so much fun.
I agree.
It would have been so much fun at least to go there for the first moment. It's such a weird, insecure move.
Yep.
To show that trailer after
it's Universal that did it too. Zemeckis pushed back and was like, "Don't do this."
That's the insecurity that I don't understand. Yeah. I mean, this movie obviously was going to be a massive hit, and people obviously were. The template was there from Star Wars. People obviously were going to, line up in droves for the last one. You in no way needed to do this. It didn't help. Yeah.
I think there is a good commercial argument, not a good creative argument. And the commercial argument is there had not been a sequel following that close on the heels of a prequel in ever. So like it's already Back to the Future Part 3, which is literally one character different from Back to the Future Part 2. Like, I think you do need to say, in 6 months, this thing is fucking coming out because it's too easy for it to get lost. And given how far Back to the Future 3 fell off from the other two, I think it still got lost a little bit. So I get the commercial consideration, but I agree as a creative choice, it's a mistake.
I think you could have accomplished that with to be concluded Memorial Day 1990. And I think people
Marty and Doc are back Memorial Day. Yeah. I mean, I want to ask
I loved To Be Concluded. That's the fucking to me that is a real gangster move.
Yeah. But it's like we're gonna fucking finish this thing. Yeah. I wanted to sort of at this point, sort of in the film, where we are in the future, and we're at Marty's house, and we're seeing that Michael J. Fox is playing an older version of himself, his younger son, and his younger daughter. I think that the seamlessness of the effects are amazing in this film. Like people talking to, like for 89, I mean, I would argue it still looks great today, but like there's scenes with people talking to various versions of themselves, and it's done pretty seamlessly. That being said, I don't know that we needed Michael J. Fox to play his daughter as well as his son, but Emily or obviously Kenny, what do you feel about this?
Oh, we're going to ask Emily to weigh in on this? How interesting.
I'm curious, Emily. Yeah, Emily.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, you know why Michael J.
Fox
I'm not
jumping
daughter,
in first.
George Soros paid him a cool $100,000 to play his daughter, and therefore corrupt America's youth.
Perfect
like that was the plan all along. No, I don't know. I think it's kind of cute. I think it's kind of clever. I didn't realize he was playing the daughter until I watched this as an adult. Like at the time, I was just like, yeah, that's just some lady they found. I don't know. Like right. I think it's kind of cute. I don't think it's necessary. Like I think if anything, they should have had the actress who plays Jennifer play younger.
That would have been interesting.
Like that would have been fun. Well, but you know what? Whatever. Yeah. Who cares?
The actress who plays Jennifer is Elizabeth Shue.
Yeah,
that's the
no.
Thing
like I couldn't remember if she's in the first one or in this one. Like
she's not.
She's not in the first one. They recast her.
But that's the other thing that I meant to bring up during the Jennifer discussion that I'll never wrap my head around. This is Elizabeth Shue after Karate Kid, after Cocktail, and most critically after Adventures in Babysitting, where like she's proven to be. Like not just another person. Yep. Like she's a star. You got her for this movie. Use her. Yeah. So yeah, the Michael J. Fox playing his own daughter. That's not the one that bothers me. The one that will forever bother me was Michael J. Fox playing a non-blood relative in
the third one.
That would always killed me. Like just like destroyed me. Yeah. But whatever.
Well, that was obviously supposed to be played by Crispin Glover, and then they were just like, whatever. And you're just like,
Seamus, what's his name? It's
Seamus. Seamus.
Yeah.
It's I mean, I don't know. I really love the kitchen scene when they're all eating the pizza.
Yeah, I like it too.
It's fucking great. Like it's just. And I gotta say, Michael J. Fox doesn't get enough credit for what he pulls off in this film. Not as much in the third one, but in this one. It's pretty incredible what he's pulling off. I mean,
playing his own son is not
great.
Like he dressed exactly the same, no makeup, no prosthetics, but it's all in the performance, and it's really wonderful. I really love it.
Yeah, and the older version of himself as well. I mean, I really do feel like that scene with Needles, with Flea as inspired casting of Flea as Needles, but like it's just he's great. He's so like kind of sad and pathetic and. I don't know.
It's you were right.
It's like his take on Crispin Glover in the first film, before obviously the positive.
There's a thing that happens to Michael J. Fox between this movie or between 3 and Spin City, where he kind of gets lost in the wilderness. And then Spin City is when he reveals his Parkinson's diagnosis. And like now he's sort of defined by that in a way that I think is unfair to how talented he is as an actor.
I agree.
I think people have kind of forgotten that he is like one of the best at this kind of like patter sitcom, like weird comedy pacing. And he knows exactly the right notes to hit every time. I think he is a legend. He's obviously a legend, but I feel like people have made him a legend for reasons other than how good he is at acting.
I agree.
100%. This happens. This happened to Christopher Reeve too, who stopped being an actor completely and just became a cause.
Yeah.
And I mean, Christopher Reeve aside, it's very unfortunate. It's like it's obviously very unfortunate for for all the medical horrible reasons. But it's just very unfortunate because people have lost track of this. And Alex P. Keaton, which is an unbelievably brilliant
good
performance.
Yeah.
Who else has two iconic roles out of the 80s? I mean, obviously Stallone has Rocky and Rambo, and Harrison Ford has Han Solo and Indiana Jones. But it's like those three guys, and one of them is Michael J. Fox.
Yes.
Yeah, no, the funny thing about the Cafe 80s is if Michael J. Fox wasn't in this movie, if this was a different movie, he would be one of those talking heads there.
Yes.
He was just as culturally relevant as Reagan and Michael Jackson. So people forget, it's funny. When I was at UTA, Phil, my boss represented him, and he was, already kind of in the throes of Parkinson's. It was post Spin City. So this was the period when Michael J. Fox would come out every year and a half, 2 years, do a arc on a show. And the one we were booking at the time was, I think, Boston Legal. He did an arc on.
Yep.
So I was talking to him a decent amount. And obviously he was, fantastic and lovely. And I went on to work on Entourage, and I happened to get on a plane a few years later, and he's sitting in first class and I'm going to coach, and I have to say something to him because, of course he's Michael J. Fox, and also I had spoken to him and all that stuff. And, he's definitely showing the effects of Parkinson's, but I introduced myself. He was totally gracious. He asked me what I was doing. I told him I was on Entourage, and he said, I can't watch that show because that was my life in the 80s, which I thought was so great. It was so sweet, But
he seems like, I mean, again, I agree with everything you guys are saying, that it is unfortunate that it does feel like the cause, and by the way, he's doing incredible work. He's in terms of funding, in terms of his fundraisers, all that sort of stuff. But it is unfortunate that it does feel like this tremendous career that he had with these unbelievable performances does feel a little bit overshadowed.
I think Good Wife was the thing that figured out how to use him, where they were like, if we have him play an asshole, it's cutting against character in two different ways, and isn't that fun? And I'm really sad nobody sort of picked up that torch. He is a great, great, great villain character actor waiting to happen at this point in his life.
He was good on Rescue Me as well. He played kind of
very hard for him to do it. I mean, that's something I do know. It's incredibly difficult to get up to figure it out. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah. I don't want him to be playing the lead of a prestige drama or something, but popping in every few episodes to juice things up. He's really good at that.
Yeah. It's interesting that the one time in the last 15 years they tried. Remember, it was the Michael J. Fox show got the straight to series order, maybe 2 seasons, and they cut it after one. I think this straight to series might have been for 2, and they dropped it, and they didn't pick up the second. But that is proof positive of the shadow he cast 20 plus years after that. They weren't giving straight to series orders when that happened at all. That was a kind of an amazing thing, and it's just that couldn't have been a less inspired project. But
yes. So we have this sort of moment now where Biff steals the DeLorean, takes the almanac, gives it to his younger self. There's something that was cut from the film, and it does feel a little bit confusing. When Biff lands, he's all in pain and contorting and what have you. There's a deleted scene where you actually see him disappear because he has essentially erased himself from existence because of the almanac. I kind of wish that was in there because it is a little bit sort of what's going on. But I mean, I don't know if it bugged you guys. But
just a point of clarification, Emily, you were right. It was a 22 episode pickup, and they aired 15.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I love every time we're just talking about a thing and then Phil's like, so this is where we are in the plot.
I'm trying. I'm just trying to keep us on the rails.
Let's do some, just let it be chaotic. Just let it be.
I can't let it be chaotic.
I love this about Phil because if it weren't for Phil, we would spin off the globe.
I gotta.
I know and I get I mean, I listen to Screen Drafts because it's my favorite, and Clay will just be like, "That's it, we're done, moving on." But Phil's a lot gentler.
I try to be gentle. I try to nudge us back onto course, but yeah, essentially, as we know, Biff has done this, given his younger self the almanac. It's created this alternate universe. It's very dark when they arrive back in 1985. It's just chaos. Lorraine is married to Biff. George is dead. Doc has been committed to a mental institution. Can we talk a little about the Death Becomes Her vibe of this portion of the film? Because it does feel like Lorraine is a character straight out of Death Becomes Her. Do you have thoughts about that, Emily?
No, I think you're right. Death Becomes Her is one of those movies I don't love as much as other queer people of my generation, but I do think that Zemeckis has this vibe where he's kind of horrified by plastic surgery that becomes like accidentally queer. And I don't know what happens. Where it's just like Robert Zemeckis, if he drives past a plastic surgery clinic for that half a block, turns into John Waters. He's like, oh, I don't like this. And then like he gets and sees like a McDonald's and he's like, it's the 50s. I love my life.
I do like this.
But yeah, there's something about the way he approaches the excess of the rich that is very campy and very queer and has something to do with women having plastic surgery in a way that is low-grade sexist, but also kind of cool because it's like the rich are just terrible and they want to eat us all. Like it's 30 years ahead of time.
Where does the witches fit into that theory?
Oh, God, I haven't watched his Witches. I just heard so many bad things about it. And I was just like, I'm not going to do this. I'm just not going to do this.
That's fair. Yeah, Kenny, were you going to say something?
Well, the other thing, I mean, that it speaks to is it's this little holdover from the my mom wants to fuck me thing in Back to the Future. That very weird, awkward, uncomfortable, you've gotten so big, Mom, which is the worst attempt at a euphemism imaginable. But again, like there's charm in the lack of, the lack of mellifluousness in the dialogue, I guess.
Sure.
But yeah, it is, that to me is always the kind of super uncomfortable part about it. It's there's nothing kind of innocent and charming in the first one. It's this very weird look at what this monster has done to my virginal mother
and to my brother and sister, and like, because they're just spoken of off camera, but like apparently his brother's a drunk and his sister has debt issues, and there's all sorts of stuff going on there.
Joey's back in jail.
That's
the stuff I love from one. I love that this is a family barely fucking old.
Better get used to these bars, kid.
Yeah.
With the kids in the but yeah, it's and even just like, obviously it's all Trumpy, but like the hot tub and the gold and the grossness, like it's just so seedy and gross. It's hard to stomach, quite honestly. It's a pretty. Who
would be a better president, Biff or Trump?
Oh Jesus,
Biff.
Oh.
I think it's Biff. I think Biff has good people around him. I think Lorraine.
That's what my mom always said about W.
I think Lorraine would steer him clear. I think like
moderating influence.
You're right. You're right. Yeah.
No.
So we go back to 55. Can we talk about these walkie-talkies and how strong these walkie-talkies are?
We're back to the plot. It's great.
Wait. How strong are the walkie-talkies?
They're talking about these walkie. They're like across town. These walkie-talkies wouldn't work.
That's all right.
It's fine. It's great. Who the fuck cares? It's fine. Yeah.
Walkie-talkies. That's where I draw the line.
I'm just saying there's some very strong walkie-talkies. That's all I'm saying. I don't want to keep us on plot, Emily. I mean, we could.
No, we're fine. I love this. I love this for you. I love it.
I want to talk about something else.
Please.
So this is the other question I had at the end of watching this movie. The course of film history, and you can include television as well, and you can include any kind of visual medium. Has to be visual, though. What is the closest thing to this? There is... my little addendum is there is nothing like this. And I can't even
Do
think
you
of anything.
mean literally
trials.
or figuratively?
Oh, there is.
Answer the question.
There is.
However you want.
It is the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode, Trials and Tribulations.
Here we go.
Which is about the crew of Deep Space Nine having to travel into the past to the original Star Trek and like walk through the original Star Trek and like do hero worship of the original Star Trek. They produced it for the 30th anniversary of Star Trek.
Okay.
And it's just them entering an old episode digitally and interacting with it and like answering questions people have about what happened in that episode. It's the closest thing there is.
What is this episode called?
Trials and Tribulations. It's from the 5th season.
I'm looking to see.
Right, that's the closest, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, I do think that. I mean, this isn't a real answer, but I'm going to say it anyway. I mean, Rick and Morty is obviously trying to sort of elicit some of this stuff, but it's obviously completely different. But
Rick and Morty is building upon this, right?
Right. That's why I'm saying it's not much of an answer. But I mean,
it's not so much even the time travel element I'm talking about. It's the tone.
Okay.
Of it. Like tonally, it's so gonzo. But also it's also sci-fi, and it also has this weird internal logic that works, and it has these bizarre relationships that only make sense within the context of this movie, and yet it is all seeped in the kind of the ethos of the 50s, which aren't heightened at all. It's very I say this because it's obviously a massively successful movie. Right? It's not like the one that came before, which is really very, character-based, story-based, and kind of, terrestrial, despite the time travel elements of it. This is a big science fiction epic, and every other big science fiction epic I could think of has coattails, but this really doesn't, as far as I can tell.
Do you think it's because of how
Stargate,
light,
kind of?
But like this movie has such a light touch is kind of the thing. Like I don't feel as though like it comes back to sort of what we were saying up top, which is that like these movies are really clean. Their premises are just really smartly delineated, and they just don't dig too deep. They figure out what questions need to be answered and what questions don't. And I just don't think we're that adroit at that today. And I don't know that people would even know where to begin. Like this just sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm done.
I have a grand unified theory of American politics in the 21st century, explained by Back to the Future Part 2, that I have been developing throughout this conversation, and I'm not even kidding. That said, I think everything is kind of the third act of Back to the Future 2. It's just nobody's doing it as well. I just watched Space Jam: A New Legacy, and that is literally trying to do Back to the Future Part 2, and it's terrible. Like,
that's bad.
there's so many, now that everybody owns all the IP, they're like, oh, you know what? We're just going to insert our characters into other things, and it's always bad. Forrest Gump is kind of this. It's like, what if Tom Hanks was like Back to the Future Part 2ing actual history? Mm-hmm. And like, it's just the second you figure it out, you could digitally blend all this stuff and like make it look seamless. It just everything kind of collapsed in on itself, and that's fine.
That's a really good argument.
That's a really good argument.
What's the political argument?
It's honestly, I was thinking as we were talking, this movie is a clean 3-act structure that is a clean three approaches to how to do a sequel. The first is we're going to do a new adventure that builds organically off the premise of the first movie. The second is we're going to do the darker, grittier version of the first movie. And the third is we're literally just going to do the first movie again, and you're going to like it. And it does those three at once. So then I started thinking more, because the second act is so Trumpy. And the first act is very Obama. Like the first act is very much like, it's 2009. Obama just got elected. We're going to have hoverboards any fucking second because we live in the future. And then the second act is, no, actually, we're going to slip into fascism and we're going to like do the bad thing. And the third act is kind of what we're going through right now, which is like, if we just keep doing the same thing, it's going to work eventually, right? Like the third act is literally like American culture in 2021 is us just like keeping going with the same thing, even though everything's falling apart, and we're eventually going to have to run up to Christopher Lloyd and be like, listen, we need a hard reset on the timeline, so let's just get on that. But yeah,
this is a brilliant theory, by the way. Like, it actually really works.
So Act 1 is Trump. I mean, Act 1 is Obama.
Act 2 is Trump.
Act 2 is Trump. The world buys that one.
Obvious, yeah.
what's interesting to me is that this in real life, in real life, I feel like Biden is just trying to get back to what we have with Obama.
Well, I'm not even really talking about Biden. I'm just like, okay, so there's this argument that Democrats should abolish the filibuster in the Senate. But they're like, but it worked before, worked in the 50s. We're just going to keep doing it. And yeah.
Well, I think I'm circling a similar territory, which is what we're really trying to do, us leftists, are trying to get back to something that only kind of existed in our imaginations and our hopes, which is this platonic ideal of the first, right? Like I don't know, that's not perfect. We're trying to build something new and better, but
But I think that here's what I think is interesting about your theory, Emily, is that the third part of this film is us looking at the first film through a different lens, right? Like it's Marty coming there trying to sort of, with the knowledge of the past, trying to fix the future. So there's something to that idea of us right now thinking we're smarter now, we can fix this, right? But to your point, it does feel fatalistically, going to come back on itself again.
And we did fix it. Everything's fine. Nothing is wrong. I think there is this desire to do brand new things. And I'm talking about our political culture, but I'm also talking about Hollywood. But the people who are in charge, the gerontocracy of this country, which is a lot of people over 65 who are holding on to the reins of power because they've had them for so long, are scared by those new things. So they're like, what if we just inserted you digitally into Back to the Future Part 1? And that could be fun, right? Like Joe Biden, whatever you think of him, is trying to digitally insert us into 2015. And isn't that great? Good for us.
Yeah. We did it, guys. So, I mean, I don't. There's not really. We've really talked about most of this movie, but I do want to say that that the third act of this movie, and you said this earlier, Kenny, is just so great. Like it completely understands what we want so well. It's seamlessly done. I love Marty in the fedora and the leather jacket and it's anyway. Yes, please go ahead.
I'm really taken with what you're talking about, Emily, and I'm really chewing on it quite a bit because So look at because again, windmill 360 dunk, right? As triumphant a third act as anything I can remember. So what do we want? We want things to be the way they were, but better. And I think ultimately that's what this movie gives you at the end, right? Like things are back to the way they were, but better. We're a little richer. We're a little happier. We're a little more successful. We're a little more cohesive. Like the bad guys are, got their just desserts. They're not in jail, but they're working for us. The social order is the way it's supposed to be. And I think that's a really kind of interesting idea of who Zemeckis is, right? Like Zemeckis is someone who is no, things were really good. Just if they were just marginally better than they were, just a little bit, everyone would be happy. And that does feel like a very weird, as you say, like a weird middle-aged white guy, one size fits all idea of how to fix things. I get it. We were so racist. But so we could do better and things will be fine, right, guys?
Right. If we had a black mayor, that would fix everything. It's like
Goldie Wilson for president. Yeah.
It's a vision of, what the world could be that is necessarily restricts certain people because, one of the reasons social programs like the New Deal were able to gain hold is because they disproportionately benefited white guys. And the second that stopped was when people were like, no, actually, I just don't want to have to pay any taxes ever. And you look at the social democracies of Europe and they are similarly have issues with when it benefits an extremely like small subset and it does spread out pretty well, then yeah, people are okay with it. But like the second you're like, no, we need to make this more egalitarian is when things start to fall apart, because humans are trash animals. We're awful. And we're like raccoons, but we can talk. So that's what I want your listeners to take away from this Patreon episode.
We're trash animals that can talk.
We're good-looking raccoons. I agree with you.
That's amazing.
I think that, and I think this is, again, love these movies, and I kind of love how well they distill the ideas of well-off white liberals. Speaking as a well-off white liberal, how the fundamental thing is, let us still fix it. Like I think the idea is like, all right, we fucked up, but let us still fix it. I think we know how to fix it. I think we know how to, we'll listen to your ideas, but like, I think we can do this one, guys. Give us another shot. And I think that's kind of what Zemeckis is saying here. It's like, all right, I think we can give us another shot.
Give us another crack at
everybody.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of been the white liberal. I think that's kind of up until like yesterday. That's kind of been the white liberal, white Democrat argument, which is like, all right, we definitely fucked up, but we could do it. Like we could, like you got it.
Or is there the cynical argument to this, which is like you're going to just keep repeating the same things over and over again, and you're going to like maybe make them a little better? Like as a storytelling structure, the third act of this film is brilliant. As like a thing that happens to Marty McFly, it's kind of calamitous. He's constantly trying to make sure he doesn't bump into himself to trigger the end of the world. He's like suddenly he's like stuck in Groundhog Day, except he has to do different things this time. Like it is kind of a nightmare. And I wonder if there is a cynical side to this. Like, you remember how many times they've been like, here's a franchise and they made a bunch of movies, but now we're going to revisit that franchise and we're going to just ignore several of those movies. Like there was this time when Neil Blomkamp was going to make an Alien movie Halloween does that. And it's like, oh, we can make it right. We can fix it. And like, instead of doing something new, instead of trying something new, it's just like this sort of cynical, constant milking of the same stone. And there's been, oh, you've gotten everything you can out of that stone, but you're going to keep doing it because people have heard that title. And like the only reason it hasn't happened to Back to the Future is because Zemeckis and Gale have such a stranglehold on the rights. And the second those guys die, it's going to become like, a free-for-all. And it's going to just be a long series of movies of whatever. By the way, there is kind of a fourth Back to the Future movie. It was an adventure game released in 2015 by a company called Telltale, which has gone out of business. You can no longer buy it, but you can look it up on YouTube. They got a really good voice match for Michael J. Fox, and they got Christopher Lloyd. And you can just like watch people play the game. It's like 3 hours long. It's actually pretty fun. It's pretty serviceable as a fourth Back to the Future movie. Bob Gale wrote it, so give it a shot, everybody.
Down for that.
I might watch that.
What's the point you made that I think is the best point ever made about Back to the Future, and is that the protagonist of Back to the Future is Robert Zemeckis.
Yeah.
Because Marty McFly as protagonist of this movie almost makes no sense.
Yep.
Because it is in no way a commentary on Gen X. It isn't. He is not a Gen X character. He's not a Gen X archetype. He is not. He is just a member of that generation nominally. So I don't even think when you say all these calamitous things happen to Marty McFly, he's not even a character. It's really all these calamitous things happen to Robert Zemeckis in the tying and untying of all these knots he's gotten himself into that he miraculously, untethers at the end and lands us in a place where it does feel like I did it, guys. I saved the world and it's a little better.
The single greatest shot of Robert Zemeckis' filmography in terms of explaining his themes is that Rube Goldberg machine that opens the first Back to the Future. This is not a new point. Lots of people have said this. But like every one of his movies is like boop, 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 boop. Like this hits this and then it's a mousetrap. And at the end, it's like, you're like, oh, I watched Michael J. Fox go through this, but the guy who like landed the vault and is doing the bow is Robert Zemeckis. It's very weird. He is not as attractive.
The other guy who does this, and I think more successfully in most of his movies, is Christopher Nolan.
For sure.
I think that at the end of some of his, because in a lot of ways, he's a less successful filmmaker, right? Like the 30-minute scene in Inception with Elliot Page and Leo is really good. Like that's really well done exposition, but you know, as an audience member, you're like, all right, I'm sitting in class for the next half an hour and listening to this stuff. So that's not like on the level of like, you know, kind of breezy exposition. That said,
It's like
the emotionality of that movie, the emotionality of that movie, like is so powerful to me. Like the Leo arc really does matter to me.
It is like I did mention Interstellar earlier, and Interstellar has big Back to the Future 2 energy.
Yes,
and like, I mean, we all got to throw it up there for Christopher Nolan's masterpiece, Tenet, which is, I started saying was the best movie he's ever made to troll people, and now I kind of believe it. Like I kind of have talked myself into it.
I mean, I'm not the first person to notice this, but that's become the cool take.
Oh yeah.
Over the last like 6 months, it's like, oh no, actually Tenet is one of the best, which is like, interesting for me as someone who hasn't seen it, because I, didn't watch it in the beginning because I feel like it's something you have to kind of clear out your schedule for a few hours for. Mm-hmm. And now to watch it now that people think it's good is going to be very weird.
I'll just say this. I fully expect to love Tenet in about 10 years. I think that I didn't love Interstellar when it came out. I liked it fine. I didn't love it. Now I love it. I think his films just take a little bit of time and distance and the ability to be able to kind of like let yourself mesh with it in a way. But what were you going to say, Emily?
Yeah. I like hear all the time, Tenet makes no sense, blah, blah, blah. Who can understand the plot? And okay, sure. But I think understanding the plot is immaterial. This is the thing about these movies. And I think Zemeckis was really good at this. So I'm going to tie this in nominally, which is like Zemeckis was really good at making you not care about the things you didn't know. Like Zemeckis was really good at being like, this is all you need to know. Nolan is also good at that, but he presents it with the veneer of like, there is so much more going on here. There almost never is. Like, it's almost always like all the stuff you need to know is told to you directly. And people are like, but there's so much exposition. And there is, but I think the way that it's presented makes people think they're missing something because it's presented as very heavy-handed and smart and whatever. Tenet is a movie where it tells you literally everything that's going on. It gives you the goals of every scene. You always know the reason the characters are doing things. And you're like, but I didn't understand it. And I think people didn't understand because the movie's emotional core is just about how boys become bros. It's literally just like, what if I had a bro and he was so good and he could travel through time and I could travel through time, and what if we were bros together? Like, that is what that movie is.
All right, don't
about.
say anything else, because I know so little about this movie. I've heard like it's like Pattinson and John David Washington like become very good friends.
Yep.
They're bros.
Yeah. That is a perfect distillation of the movie. Emily has summed it up for you.
How boys become bros should be what 25% of movies about men are about, at least.
Yeah.
Because it's the most undertold, like it's, when we were on Hindsight, something we were like very proud of is it was like unabashedly a show about female friendship. But that happens. Like there's plenty of stuff about female friendship. People are afraid about shows about things about male friendship. I mean, I'm not breaking any ground here. And when they do stuff about male friendship, like it's a joke. Like Step Brothers is about male friendship, but it's a big joke. Mm-hmm. Zoolander is about male friendship, but it's a big joke. Yeah. Right? I want shows.
I love you, man. About that? Yeah.
Big joke.
Big joke.
Right?
Yep.
And always kind of, like Step Brothers, not so much, but always kind of like towing up the line to gay panic.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So
I love you, man, very much so, for sure.
Very much so.
Yeah. I want to rate this film because I'd like us to do our top 5 Zemeckises, and I know that Kenny has.
Phil,
yes,
can I read a Twitter thread I did about the film Tenet?
If you must.
If you must.
I'm going to try and skip spoilers. All right, I saw this movie with my good, wonderful friend Angie Han, hopefully future guest of the show. She's wonderful. So I saw it in like 70 millimeter. It was one of my first movie-going experiences back from the pandemic. So I saw it back in May. So I tweeted, I saw Tenet on a big screen in 70 millimeters tonight. And you know what? I love this movie so much more than most other Nolans. It's like the kid from the Wells for Boys SNL sketch was handed a bucket of action toys and asked to make up a fun romp. Tweet 2, Chris, now show your father your little play. Baby Christopher Nolan solemnly holds a Mr. Potato Head aloft, plucking each and every facial feature off. We live in a Twilight world. Seeing Tenet shows me why I struggled so much with male bonding before coming out beyond the obvious, because the message of Tenet is that when you and another guy are bros, you just know it and it's a vibe and you both feel it kind of and you don't ever say it. Let's see here. People are always like, I don't understand that movie. And it's a movie about your first week in an internship at a really demanding job where you don't want to fuck up. Not knowing what's going on is the point. A friend of mine told me she got super high and fell asleep in the middle of Tenet. And let me tell you, that is also one of the 4 or 5 top ways you can watch Tenet. There are like 500 3-hour-long Tenet explained videos on YouTube that basically just repeat the phrase temporal pincher movement over and over again. And in the scene where Clements Posey and where Clements Posey explains things to us, we are explicitly told that Tenet is just vibes, man. I'm going to skip this one because it's a little bit spoilery. I'm going to skip that one because it's a little bit spoilery. In conclusion, I want to see 15 more Tenet movies, each with plotting more opaque than the last. And when Nolan accepts Best Picture for the final Tenet, he says, Tenet is when you love your bro so much you could die.
It's a beautiful thread. A beautiful thread.
First of all, wonderful. Love it. You said something about the internship thing, right? Mm-hmm. What was the internship thing? It's about working your first week at
and not wanting to fuck up.
I think that people are so thrown when they see a movie and they don't understand what's going on immediately, and they don't ever consider that like the characters in the movie might not also understand what's going on. And like Tenet is very much about like, oh shit, I have this new job and everybody travels through time and I don't know what I'm doing.
There's a weird bunker mentality that develops at a new internship. Not a new job because you're the new kid, right? Mm-hmm. But the new internship because you generally show up with a class. And when you show up with this class of people, all of whom are like the lowest rung on the totem pole you could imagine. Lowest rung, that was mixing bad metaphors. That we take that out. That was horrible. You do. So I worked an internship at the Mets when I was 19. And we were basically, thrown into a small office, 7 of us, and called upon when there was a task to do. But again, this is the Mets. Like every day I was running some errand for someone who I considered a hero. And my best friend in the world was someone from this internship. And we knew right away that we were bros. It was like.
Did you ever say it though? Did you ever say it?
Oh, he knows. It's Teddy's brother.
Okay.
So Teddy, who's been a guest on this podcast many times. It was within the first day, we're like, are we soulmates? Is that what's happening here?
That's incredible.
And it is. It's this funny thing. Now I have to see Tenet, and I might have to see it with Will.
Let's rate this movie because I know you have somewhere to be, Kenny.
I do.
So in '89, I love this movie. I give it a 95.
It's a movie about bros.
In 1989, I gave this film a 95. Before this podcast, I'd probably give it an 87. And after this podcast, I'm probably around the same thing, like 88, 80, maybe 86. I don't know, something like that.
That's kind of low, Phil, for a classic.
Okay.
I want to say the first time I saw this movie, I was one of those pricks who said it was better than the first.
Crazy.
So I will say I think I had it like a 97, 98.
Okay.
I no longer think that. But before this podcast, I had it at a 94.
Okay.
After this, and I would say the first one's a 99. Yeah. After this podcast, I do actually want to go down a little bit. I'm going to go down to a 91. I think that there's stuff that isn't the best, but I also think it's such a wonderful experience. I love every second of it. So 90, 91. Yeah. That's better than I give The Wizard, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Emily?
What? The Wizard?
Rewatch The Wizard. It's great.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And
have you seen The Wizard, Emily?
I'm positive you would agree.
No. You would love The Wizard,
no,
Emily.
I haven't seen it. I've never seen it.
Okay.
I would love The Wizard. Okay. I when I saw this first time. Who knows when that was? Probably I would have given it 98, 99. When I saw it before this, I probably would have been 90. And I think I'm there still. 90, 89, somewhere in there.
Okay. Do we want to quickly go through our top 5 Zemeckis movies? I know that it's some of these are going to be pretty indisputable, but do we want to? Let's just try it. I'm going to start. I got number 5. I got Castaway. That's my number 5. What's your 5, Kenny?
My number 5 is Forrest Gump.
Wow,
a movie I hate, but I also love. So I wanted to talk about Forrest Gump a little bit, and I wanted to table until now because I wanted to acknowledge I've seen Forrest Gump hundreds of times. I can quote every line. It's not hundreds, but you know what I mean, dozens of times. I can quote every line. It's gone from a movie that I think is brilliant and the best to a movie I think is the worst movie possible, and everywhere in between. But I can't ignore like how much it lives within me, whether it's good or bad. It's Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
So it deserves a place on the list above all the movies I think are kind of whack of his, or some movies I like. Like I like Death Becomes Her. I like Flight. But below the 4, I think are just awesome flicks. So Forrest Gump 5.
What's your 5?
Gosh, I'm really tempted by Forrest Gump now. Like I did love that movie for a long time, and I think it is. How many movies have spawned a low key dining chain, like where people tell you trivia from the movie. But I just, in good conscience, I don't think I can. Let me think. Can I do this? Emily, are you going to do this?
I love this.
Fuck
We're getting
5. Forrest Gump.
Okay.
Forrest Gump.
Yeah. Wow, there it is.
I was gonna put What Lies
did you
Beneath,
bump?
which I think is a little underrated. I bumped What Lies Beneath.
I like that movie too.
I like that movie too.
I think What Lies Beneath, Death Becomes Her, Flight. I don't like any of the mocaps, though I think Polar Express is endlessly fascinating.
That movie's crazy.
I think that those are movies that are fine, interesting movies that are good movies. Like What Lies Beneath, I think is actually like his best basic movie. Yeah. In terms of anybody could have done it, but he really showed just how good of a director he is when he's not fucking around too much. But I think there are 4 that are just fucking basics.
My number 4 is Death Becomes Her. I love that movie. I think it's crazy. I think it's just absolutely nutty. I love a dark comedy. I think it's just insane. I love what Meryl's doing in that movie. I love what all the 3 leads are doing. It's just I think it's a baffling film. It's baffling that movie was made, and I love that it was made, and that's where I'm at. What's your 4, Katie?
Castaway.
Okay.
I love Castaway.
Great movie.
Castaway is an incredible movie. Mm-hmm. And I've heard many people say they don't like the end of the movie. I fucking love it.
You mean the Crossroads thing? Is that what you're talking about?
No, I mean that Helen Hunt didn't wait for him.
Right.
I know some people, that's horrible with end. No, that's really fucking bold and powerful.
I agree.
I love Stuff in the Island. I love Tom Hanks' performance. I love the way it was shot. I love the way it looks. I think it's just such an incredibly engaging movie. Really hard to do. So yes, 4.
Yeah, love Castaway.
I just remembered the existence of I Want to Hold Your Hand. So that's 5, 6, 7. That's somewhere in there. I just wanted to shout it out because very good movie. Very good movie. What's your 4? My number 4 is Contact. I think Contact is very smart, very thoughtful, very moving film that has a lot of cool stuff in it, and also basically the finale of Lost is the end of that movie, and I love the finale of Lost. Also, kind of by default, Robert Zemeckis' best female character is in that movie, but she's great. Yeah. I love her.
Yeah, I mean, Contact is my 3, so I'm going to talk. I'm going to piggyback on that and just say that I love Contact. I saw it a bunch of times in the theater when it came out. I think it's another example of how Zemeckis can take very difficult material and make it accessible in terms of time travel and all that kind of stuff, and what he's doing here in terms of just making it very emotional and like giving the emotional stakes to something that can seem very unemotional, I think is really. I also just think it's phenomenally, just the technical proficiency of it is just staggering. Like, it's a really beautiful film, and I love Jodie Foster in it. I think Ellie Arroway is one of my favorite characters too, of hers. So
I haven't seen Contact since the theater.
wow.
So it did not make my list.
Okay.
And I've been meaning to rewatch, because you bring it up a lot, Phil. I've been meaning to rewatch it for a long time, but I didn't, and I wish I had.
It's all good. What's your three?
Back to the Future Part 2.
We've talked about it a little bit. What's your three, Emily?
I had thought about it. I really thought about it. Like, this is my favorite Ocean's 11 movie is Ocean's 12, and I will frequently have it on my Steven Soderbergh lists for that reason.
Kenny is going to, his head's going to pop off his body.
I love it. I love it. Look at this. I love it. I love it.
I can't talk about it too much because I hate it so much.
And he's like, I wish you,
so
if for our listeners who can't see Kenny right now, Kenny's bursting because he knows he has to leave in 8 minutes and he wants desperately to dive into this.
No, it's not that I want to fight about it. It's that, like, I understand. I fought with David Sims about it. Like, that's like that. But like it's not that I want to fight about it again. It's that, like, again, much like Back to the Future 3, and again, this is not a similar movie, but it's such a kick in the gut of the audience who loved Ocean's 11, and for whatever reason, this doesn't bother me in general. Like, I don't hate Last Jedi because it's not like Force Awakens. I love Last Jedi, and I think that after 7 movies, I'm very comfortable with the idea of riffing a little bit on what we're doing here. But Ocean's 11 is so fucking perfect and wonderful, and I think basically saying everything.
Look what you've done to him, Emily. Look what you've done to him. Ocean's 12 just feels like him saying, "You were such rubes for liking that Hollywood shit. This is what I really wanted to do."
Yeah. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Another really masterful movie that we just don't have time to talk about, but I wanted to bring up for no reason, is Martin Scorsese's The Departed. But anyway, my number three Robert Zemeckis film. So I know you got to get out of here, Kenny. I know you got to get out.
Yeah, what's your three? Emily?
My number 3 Robert Zemeckis film is Castaway. Some brilliant visual storytelling in that movie. I think it's underrated.
Oh my God.
It's a great movie.
Nothing makes me happier. Like when I was saying the Goonies sucked, and you're like, sucks, and I'm like, yeah, we agree.
We get it.
Crazy ass take, and then, but I whatever.
Okay.
Ocean's 12. I for some reason I feel like my Ocean's 12 take, particularly among people that I respect, is a lot more controversial than my Departed take.
It's true.
All right, so Phil,
okay, my number two is Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Wait. This is a big reveal. Yeah, because there are only 2 answers for this.
I agree.
So your number 2 is
my number 2 is Roger Rabbit. I mean, listen, I went back and forth on 1 and 2. I mean, we're talking about a hair of difference between them. No pun intended. I just think that rabbits. So I Who Framed Roger Rabbit is just, it's perfect. It's perfect. I watch it every time and I think to myself, how did they make this? Like, physically, how did they make this? How did they do what they did in 1988? It's a movie fucking miracle. It's beautiful. It's perfect. I mean, what else can be said about it? It's amazing. What's your 2, Kenny?
Well, I mean, I'll reveal my 2 and 1 at the same time. Okay. Because your 1, if you want to talk about your 1 as well.
My 1 is Back to the Future. So, yeah.
Got hair in my mouth. My order is the opposite of yours, Phil.
Okay.
I watch both of these films. Every time I watch them, the same thought enters my head, which is this the best movie ever made?
Yeah.
I think Back to the Future is a good answer for the best movie ever made, and I think Roger Rabbit is a slightly better answer for the best movie ever made. And like there was a brief period during the pandemic where I was like ready to just fucking plant my flag and say Roger Rabbit is the best movie and my favorite movie. I could talk for hours. It's the greatest. Everything about it's perfect. So,
Emily?
It depends on the day. But today I'm going to say Roger Rabbit second, Back to the Future first. I think I have an article on Vox.com about how Back to the Future is the most perfect blockbuster ever made. I don't think it's the best. I think it's the most perfect. Every piece of it pays off in a way that is just fantastic to see unwind. I don't love clockwork stories where everything locks together, but in that movie, it's phenomenal. It's just so well done.
Yeah, I think that ultimately the reason that I gave Back to the Future a slight edge, and I agree with you, Emily, it's a day. It changes, however you feel on that day.
Me too. I went back and forth too.
I do think that Back to the Future being entirely original, I think that Roger Rabbit does have a slight debt to our love for a lot of these characters coming into it, just in terms of some of the IP that it plays with. Obviously, Roger Rabbit was a new creation and there's so much new stuff there, but there is also a little bit of a love for pre-existing cartoon characters that helps the movie. And that's not a dig at it, so I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying that that's just a thing that it does have.
Well, that sounds a little bit more like a degree of difficulty argument. But,
yes, no, for sure.
But there is no higher degree of difficulty than what Roger Rabbit did. And to me, the real world history retold with humans and tunes through the lens of film noir.
Brilliant.
It's too much for me. It's like it's the biggest fucking ice cream sundae you could imagine.
It's the greatest. It's the greatest.
I love them both.
They're both perfect. And I'll just say, just to wrap this up, because I do feel like I would love Zemeckis to give us something good again. Like, I would really love him to find shore again. Do you think it's possible, Emily?
I don't know. I would love, he's the kind of guy who could just randomly make I think there's room for a revisionist blockbuster in the way that there was room for revisionist westerns, and he might be able to do it. I think Spielberg is more capable, but I think Zemeckis probably could. And I'd be interested to see it happen.
Do you think it will be his Pinocchio? Starring Tom Hanks as Geppetto? Okay.
I do not think so. I disagree.
All right, so Spielberg notwithstanding.
Yes.
Though he really doesn't really fall into this anyway. Ridley Scott notwithstanding. That's a better example.
Okay.
Do people do this? Do people, kick ass in a time period and then kind of flounder for 10 to 15 to 30 years and then come back and do something incredible? And I don't think Ridley ever really floundered, but I do think some of Ridley's best stuff was made in the 70s, and the only guy I can think of is to me the famous example of Sidney Lumet making Before the Devil Knows You're Dead when he's 75 after making some pretty forgettable.
I do think that Ridley makes a lot of movies, more movies. He's willing to just kind of get up and just take another whack at it. It feels like Zemeckis he really went for it on the mocap stuff. It didn't really pay off. I don't know the answer.
That's amazing.
It's crazy.
It's so funny. Blank Check did the whole series on it, but it is so funny how hard he went on bad technology. Yeah. Contrasting with how hard James Cameron went on good technology.
Well, Zemeckis broke the ground that James Cameron ended up on. It's just he got there too early. But somebody has to get there too early. It's like the high frame rate stuff is eventually going to pay off, but now it kind of looks crappy.
Yeah, it's the first person through the wall gets bloody, and Zemeckis got real bloody. But anyway,
that
Emily,
was us on Hindsight.
Thank you so much for coming on to talk about this with us, and we look forward to having you back to talk about something else very, very soon.
Oh, thank you so much. I was so glad to be here, and I know that Kenny needs to go, but here are 5 jokes I thought of and didn't get a chance to say throughout this episode. One was I was going to ask Phil if Cineplex Odeon said in a Canadian accent was funny. Two, God, I've forgotten them all already. No, two was Phil took me to Ready Player One just like a couple days after my egg had cracked, and I was like, knew I was a trans woman, and I was like, God, do the girls get anything to do in this movie? And I'm just going to do three because I don't want to keep it too long. Yeah. Number three is that when I was sitting at a bar once, a woman sat down across from me, and she just immediately said, do you ever feel beholden to dreams you had as a teenager? And she is now one of my best friends. That's how girls know their bros. Anyway, that's really? A whole bunch of things I thought of throughout the episode. But did not get to say.
That's so sweet. Well,
and a couple others, I should have written them down.
Oh, well. Ready Player One. That was my daughter watching Ready Player One. But my daughter goes, "Are there any black people in this episode, in this show?"
There's that too.
No. And then my son, no. This is what the conversation was. My daughter goes, it was awesome. My daughter goes, "Are there any black people in the show?" And Rollins goes, my son goes, "It's African American." And my daughter goes, "No, it's black." And they're like, "Dad," I'm like, "Well, right now, it's a longer conversation, but I'm really excited that you're looking at film with this lens." But yeah,
it's great. There you go.
Anyway, my name is Emily VanDerWerff. I'm just going to recite my bio.
Please tell us all about your stuff. Easy. Yeah.
I am Emily VanDerWerff is the critic at large at Vox. Before that, she was the TV editor of the AV Club. Her writing has also appeared in Grantland, Salon, and the Los Angeles Times. She's the co-creator of the audio fiction award-nominated audio fiction podcast, award-winning audio fiction podcast, Arden, and the co-author of the book Monsters of the Week, the complete critical companion to the X-Files. She lives in Los Angeles with her wife and an ever-changing number of cats. Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/EmilyVDW.
Yes. Thank you so much.